Okay, let's start. Welcome everyone to our webinar on how to mitigate your business's health and safety legal risk. My name is Nkang, and I'm a practice leader in LegalVision's employment and health and safety team. I'm joined today by my colleague, Saeidul Haque, who is an associate in the same team. So before we begin, a couple of quick housekeeping items. As always, you'll receive the recording and slides of this webinar in your email after the webinar. And during the webinar, please do submit all your questions in the chat box and we'll answer them at the end. Finally, please complete the feedback survey after the webinar. We'd really appreciate that. So moving on to the good news this morning, all attendees are eligible to receive a free consultation with us to discuss how we can help you with your contracts or other business legal needs. And to request this free consultation, you should provide us with your contact details in the survey that appears at the end of the webinar. So what are we discussing today? In today's webinar, we'll be looking at health and safety laws and policies. We'll also look at how you consult your staff, as well as the key roles you should bear in mind. And then we'll move on to risk assessments and how to conduct those. We'll also touch on your obligations to loan workers and home workers, and then the health and safety executive and what their role is. And then we will look at your recording and reporting duties, as well as insurance. As mentioned earlier, at the end of the webinar, we'll be answering all your questions. So please do submit your questions throughout the webinar through the chat function. So now, without any delay, I'm going to pass on to my colleague Saeidul, who will speak to you about health and safety laws and what you should be considering when it comes to your health and safety policy.
Thank you very much, Comfort. So it's a great point. So the first thing we're going to go through is why you should consider health and safety laws and general policies as well. So health and safety laws apply to all businesses, no matter how small, and you have a general duty to ensure, so far as reasonably possible, the health, safety and welfare of all your staff. The objective is to provide a safe working environment for your staff and to protect everyone affected by your business from harm, including contractors, customers, visitors and general members of the public. When it comes to a health and safety policy, employers with 5 or more employees have a legal duty to have a written health and safety policy and to share this with their staff. Having this policy ensures that both you and your staff are clear about your responsibilities. We recommend that all businesses, irrespective of the number of employees, have a written health and safety policy, as it generally helps improve the health and safety within your business and allows for transparency. Your health and safety policy should set out your obligations as an employer. It should also set out the rights and responsibilities of your staff in relation to health and safety in the workplace. It's important to ensure that this is not just a generic document, but that your policy reflects the nature of your workplace, your industry, and the type of business you run. Some of the things that your policy should include includes your commitment to tackling risks in the workplace and your pledge to observing legal duties, your responsibilities as an employer, your employees' duties in relation to health and safety, the name and contact details of the person in charge of health and safety, the training, instruction, information and supervision that will be provided to your staff, safe use of equipment and first aid, and risk assessments and how to report workplace injuries. And now I'll pass you back to my colleague Comfort to talk you through staff consultation, key health and safety roles as well.
Thank you so much, Saeidul. So starting with staff consultation, as an employer, you have a legal duty to consult with your staff on matters concerning health and safety in the workplace. So you shouldn't just take it on as a sole obligation and ignore your staff in the process or during the process. So there are different ways of consulting your staff. If you are a small business, you can consult your staff directly by speaking to individual members of staff or speaking to them in small groups. Alternatively, if you are a larger organization, a larger business, then you can have health and safety representatives within your business. And these can be representatives that are nominated by your other staff or perhaps yourself. So what you then do is consult with your representative and then they speak to your staff directly. These are for larger businesses. And what does this mean for you? So when you are consulting with your staff, you need to listen to your employees and understand their concerns when it comes to health and safety in the workplace. You have to be speaking to them about the risk that exists in the work that they do individually. or perhaps their workstation. So if you have staff using specific equipment, of course, the risks that they may face or the concerns they have will be different from a staff that's just mainly on the computer. So you should speak to them about these risks that exist in the work they do. The other thing you should do as well is just try and discuss and agree on how those risks will be controlled and eliminated where possible. Usually you would come up with practical ways of managing the risk, but also it's always useful that sometimes your employees will be the one to come up with the really good practical ways of keeping themselves safe in the workplace. You should also provide your staff with the relevant information and training on hazards, how to spot risk, and also the measures that you've put in place to deal with these hazards and risk. And the other thing as well is that where there are emergency procedures in place, for them to follow, you should make sure that you communicate this directly with your staff. Also, the other thing to think about is training. So you should be giving training to all your staff, especially when you have new hires, people joining your business for the first time. You should give them training on health and safety, how to evacuate your building and things like that. And if individuals are changing roles, let's say you had someone that was based on the computers and now they're changing to a different room or working in your warehouse, then they should have trainings on how to lift heavy objects. So there should be training when people change roles or when people take on additional responsibilities. Definitely consider training as well for vulnerable employees, such as pregnant people or disabled employees in general. So training should be ongoing and it should be quite relevant to the work they do as well and the nature of your workplace. Moving on and talking about the key health and safety roles you should be considering. First of all, you have to think about and appoint a competent person who will help the business manage health and safety in general. And this is a person or the people that will ensure that you meet your legal obligations. So we call them the competent person. If you have more than one, then it can be the competent people. The key thing is that these people or this person should have the skills and knowledge to be able to spot hazards in the workplace and recommend controls to be put in place to protect people from harm. They don't need any formal qualification, but it's always good to appoint someone that have experience in how to manage health and safety. That's always quite useful. So when you're thinking about a competent person, if you are, let's say, a very small business, a startup, then the competent person can be yourself, as a founder or perhaps another director of the business. And as I said, you can have one or more employees from your business, or you can appoint someone externally, actually. So you can have a consultant to advise you who are outside of your organization. Of course, this may mean additional costs to your business, so it's worth thinking about that. But there are people out there that provide that service. You also need to appoint a first aider and ensure that you have a fully stocked first aid kit in your premises at all times. So when we're talking about a first aider, these guys, they need to be trained. So they need to be trained on how to deliver first aid, and such training will usually be provided by the likes of St. John Ambulance or similar providers in the UK. So generally what the course will provide is ensure that the first aider will have practical skills needed in most workplaces. And also the training will equip them with the skills they need, of course, and the knowledge and ability to deal with first aid emergencies. So it's always advisable to use a reputable training provider when it comes to first aid, and just to make sure you give your employee and first aider that confidence they need to deliver when that time comes. And finally, the other role to consider as well is a fire marshal. And when you're thinking about fire marshal, especially if you're not sharing an office building, then you should send one of your employees or perhaps yourself to train to become a fire marshal. So people that are in this role, they have to attend the training course, as I said, but again, their key responsibility will be overseeing the fire safety in your workplace. And then they'll also have the duties, of course, to carry out the fire risk assessment in your premises. They'll be responsible for creating emergency evacuation plan if you don't have one in place already. And also they'll ensure that all the fire safety equipment in your premises, such as like your fire extinguishers, the correct fire safety signs are all in place. So they're quite useful. And generally in the event of a fire or there has to be an evacuation, the fire marshals are the ones you see with high-vis jackets, and they will raise the alarm and ensure that all your staff are directed out of the building using the safest route. So although the fire marshals may be required sometimes to speak directly with emergency services if they were to attend your premises for any reason, we don't encourage, or you shouldn't encourage them to fight fires directly unless they're specifically trained to do so. So those are the key roles to consider: having a fire marshal, having a competent person to be your health and safety manager, and also making sure you have a first aider in your premises. So that covered, I'll pass back to Saeidul to talk you through risk assessments and practical steps to prevent workplace injuries.
Thank you very much, Comfort. So when we talk about common workplace risks, we have to think generally about pains and aches, which could be to the back and neck, simply from using display screen equipment like laptops or computers. We also have to think about things like electrical safety, noise, slips and trips, and work-related stress. And when it comes to managing these types of risks, a risk assessment is always going to be very useful to mitigate these. And to carry out a risk assessment, you will need to go through a step-by-step process to be able to control or mitigate the risk in your workplace. And as part of a risk assessment, you should walk around your workplace and think about how people work, the equipment, chemicals and substances they use, if that's applicable, what safe and unsafe practices are in operation, and what is the overall condition of your premises. When thinking about these, you should consider what may cause harm and who may be affected. So is that going to be your employees? Is that going to be contractors? Could it be visitors? Or could it perhaps be someone else? As part of this process as well, you should always look to review your accident book and sickness absence record for any workplace hazards, just to see if there's any sort of common themes or trends, and if so, to see if we can do anything to manage these particular risks. Once you've identified the hazards in your workplace, what you'll then need to do is consider ways of controlling the risk. This can be done simply by asking yourself what you can do to get rid of the hazard itself altogether, or perhaps by putting in place controls to reduce the likelihood of the risk causing harm to people. Practical things you can do include replacing machinery, changing your processes, purchasing personal protective equipment, and reorganizing work to reduce exposure to the risk in the first place. You should record all your findings in your risk assessment report, and the report should include information on the hazards that you've spotted, who you identified may be harmed and how, what you will be doing to control the risks, and when you will do this as well, because it is important to act without undue delay as well. It is also important that you continue to review your risk assessment report, as well as the controls you put in place to make sure that they are actively working as well. If there are any changes to the workplace, your staff spot a problem, or if you recruit a new employee, you should also look to review your risk assessment. And generally speaking, you should be looking to review this at least once per year as well. In terms of other things to consider then as part of the risk assessment, you should look at considering a general risk assessment for your business, whether you operate an office, a warehouse or a shop. This should be the first step to consider. Other things you should consider would be a fire safety risk assessment as well, to identify if there's any particular fire risks in your workplace. You should also consider a display screen equipment workstation assessment, or a DSC assessment, if staff habitually use DSC as part of their role. So if they use laptops, computers, iPads, any sort of tablets, part of the day-to-day role, this is when this should be considered. And if you run a food business, you should also consider a risk assessment for food preparation, cooking, and service as well. When it comes to workplace facilities, you have to also ensure that your workers have access to welfare facilities, such as water, toilets, wash basins with soap, and towels or a hand dryer. You should also look to provide them with somewhere to eat and rest as well. Your premises, generally speaking, should be clean and have good ventilation. It should have a reasonable temperature, suitable lighting, and have enough room for workstations and seating. Now we're going to talk about protecting lone workers and home workers, because as an employer, you have a duty to protect your lone workers and home workers. And lone workers are effectively those employees that work by themselves without close or direct supervision, and there are greater risks for those people that work alone. Home workers are simply those that work from their own homes, using their own equipment or equipment provided by yourself as their employer. Now, when it comes to managing the risks of these types of workers, you must carry out risk assessment, which may be something that you do remotely when necessary, and asking the workers about any control measures that can be put in place to make sure they are protected. You should also look to train the staff on general health and safety, keep in touch with them regularly, and respond to any reported incidents as well. You have the same health and safety responsibilities for home workers and lone workers as you do for any other workers as well, and you potentially also have the same liability for accidents or injuries that occur to these types of workers as well. This means it is very important to provide supervision, information and training, as well as putting in place adequate control measures to protect these workers as well. I'll now pass you back to my colleague Comfort, who will talk you through and about the Health and Safety Executive, their role and enforcement for non-compliance.
Thank you so much, Saeidul, for going through that. First of all, let's talk about the Health and Safety Executive. Usually they call them HSE, that's the short form. So the HSE is actually an independent regulator in Britain when we talk about workplace health and safety. So they are the regulators. And generally, they do not work alone. They work in partnership with your local authorities. And what they generally do is try and inspect, investigate, and take enforcement action, of course, to prevent harm or hold people or companies who break the law to account. So when we're thinking about HSE, there's something that actually is very, very useful for other than enforcement, which is usually scary to businesses. But they do provide advice and guidance, which is really helpful for businesses. So also when matters are reported to HSE, they may decide on how to carry out the next steps, which may include an independent investigation. So what they will do is carry out an investigation into the reported concerns, and this will allow them to, of course, determine what are the causes of these concerns or reported injuries. Then they can share the lessons with your business and identify what actions your business will need to take to prevent the incident from happening again, or perhaps to avoid harm. So in some instances, what HSE will be there to do is to gather evidence to bring a prosecution against you and your business. So generally, when we're thinking about what are their enforcement, if I wasn't to comply with health and safety, it can include them providing you with information and advice as to how to do better. The advice can be in person, it can be in writing. Generally, when health and safety executives send someone to your premises, it's always best to have someone responsible around to speak to them. In case they give this advice in person, then you can take good notes as to how to improve. What they can also do is to serve you with notices, and they can also issue you with simple cautions and prosecution as well. So this is what their role is, and generally that's why we always ensure that people really understand their obligation, take it very seriously, and put in place everything we've gone through in this webinar and we'll continue to go through. So next up, I'm going to speak to you about your recording and reporting duties, because that's also very important. So first of all, looking at accidents and investigations, and this includes near misses as well. If you have a workplace accident or a near miss, then you should definitely investigate it thoroughly. And this should be done to ensure you have corrective actions in place, and that is taken, and also learnings are shared with your staff and improvements are put in place to prevent the incident from happening again. And when gathering information and when carrying out your investigations, we always advise our clients that there are key questions and considerations you have to bear in mind. And you should generally, as a health and safety manager or someone responsible for gathering this information and carrying out the investigation, you should ask yourself, where and when did the incident happen? Who was injured or who was at risk or who was involved in the incident? How did it happen? And to know all these things, like how did it happen, you need to speak to the people that were around, and also ask them, was there anything unusual about the working conditions on the day or time? Perhaps it was raining heavily and water was brought in without having any adequate signs to show that the floor was slippery, things like that. Or just generally asking what was taking place at the time the incident happened. So generally, we expect that you have controls in place. So the other question will be, were your safe working controls and procedures followed by the staff present? And for your investigation as well, you should also consider why your controls failed and put in place an action plan to rectify it. It may mean having additional controls in place to make sure this doesn't happen again. And generally, when you're having investigations and thinking about next steps, what controls we need to put in place, how can we avoid this happening again, you should ensure that your action plan is specific. So it's specific, is measurable, and also is agreed by all the parties involved. So whoever is responsible for taking out the actions, you agree the steps with them. It also has to be realistic. If you're a small business and you look at it, is it affordable to you? What other things can you do? So you have to be quite realistic about the approach you're going to take and the action plan you have in mind, and have a set time scale. So the worst thing to do is to say, oh, we're going to do this at some time in the future, because likely it will be forgotten and it will not happen. So it's best to have a time scale as well, just so the person responsible knows that there is a deadline to meet and they have to put in place the action plan. So coming to your recording and reporting duties, my colleague talked about the accident book. This is quite an essential document in your workplace, as the law requires that you have this in place to record and report details of specified work-related injuries and incidents. So you've heard of the regulation called RIDA, or RIDA, depending on how you pronounce it. So it's basically the law on reporting of injuries, diseases, and dangerous occurrences regulations, 2013. And generally, they require that you have that accident book in place and you record all the specified work injuries, especially the very serious ones. So moving on to what is serious, what fatalities and major injuries, it must be reported immediately. So workplace death, or if you're thinking about fatal accidents to non-workers like members of the public, you have to report this. Also, accidents that result in your workers being incapacitated for more than 7 days should be reported to the authorities. The other thing as well you have to do when thinking about these type of incidents is to ensure that you record accidents resulting in people being off work for more than 3 days. Put that down in your accident book. So how do you make a report to HSE? That's the regulators. Generally, you can report incidents online. So if you go on their website, HSE website, there will be an online form for how to and instructions on how to report incidents. And the other thing as well you can do is, if you wanted to report by phone call, you can contact their incident contact center by telephone, and the telephone number is also on their website. And as I said, generally, once you report incidents to the regulators, it's always a good idea to also report it in your accident book, just so you have an account as to what you've reported and the incident that occurred as well, and just ensuring that everything aligns in case HSE wanted to come and investigate further. So that's all about HSE and what they do, and generally how you ensure that you record and report your and follow your duties accordingly. And I'll pass on to Saeidul just to take you through how to ensure you have adequate insurance cover for your business.
Thank you very much, Comfort. So when it comes to insurance, the main thing to think about as an employer is employer's liability insurance, because you must obtain this as soon as you become an employer, and it is a legal requirement as well. So employer's liability insurance will effectively help you pay compensation if an employee becomes injured or becomes ill because of the work that they do for you as well. And it will also look to cover potentially home workers as well. And you will also need to consider if any sort of cover is required for employees that work abroad as well, if you have any remote workers abroad as well. Now, when it comes to the policy itself, it needs to cover you for at least a minimum of £5 million and come from an authorised insurer as well. You may be asking, how do we find out whether someone's authorised or not? Well, the simple answers to that is you can ensure that your insurer is authorised by checking the Financial Conduct Authority register online, or you can contact the Financial Conduct Authority directly by telephone as well, a number which can be found on their website. Now, if you don't have adequate insurance in place, you could be fined up to £2,500 for every single day that you're not properly insured. So it's quite a hefty fine for not having that insurance in place. A copy of that insurance certificate should also be displayed either physically or electronically, and must be readily accessible as well. If an employee requests a copy of your certificate, you must make it accessible to them within 10 days of their request. And the insurance certificate itself must contain certain information, such as the level of cover that you have in place, the company that is covered, and the name of the insurer as well. And if you don't have this insurance certificate, you can be fined up to £1,000 by the health and safety executive if you simply don't display it or refuse to make it available to inspectors if they ask. I'll now pass you back to my colleague Comfort to talk you through the final steps before we go through some of the questions.
Thank you very much, Saeidul. So thanks all for listening. And that concludes the main part of our webinar today. And just to let you know, you might find our publication useful, and that's Safety Essentials for SMEs. And as you can see on the screen, you can download it by scanning the QR code in the handout panel. Our clients find this publication very, very useful, especially in relation to health and safety for your business. And now, just to let you know about our upcoming event, we do have one that may be of interest to you, and that is on navigating commercial disputes. So strategies for preventing and resolving disputes. That is taking place on Tuesday, 19th of September, 10 a.m. And you can register using the link shown. Alternatively, if you go on our website, you can also have access to, under the event section, all the webinars we have coming up. So we're going to answer your questions shortly. So please don't forget to submit those questions, and we'll take them in a minute. So whilst I wait for the latecomers to submit their questions, I'm going to tell you about LegalVision, especially our membership. So LegalVision's membership, if you're not familiar with us, is a cost-effective alternative to the expensive hourly rates you experience with traditional law firms. So at LegalVision, for an affordable monthly fee, all our clients receive cost certainty, and they also have all-inclusive legal services. This includes unlimited document review and also access to our lawyers for unlimited drafting, amending, reviewing business contracts, and commercial leases as well. So the other thing you have as well is unlimited legal advice consultation. So if you needed to speak to a lawyer about your legal concerns, you had a legal questions, or perhaps just wanted to bounce off some commercial ideas that may be a bit technical or legal, then you can speak to our team of 100+ specialist lawyers, and that includes in the UK and other jurisdictions. And then that includes questions on business restructuring or structuring, employment matters and HR support. We also provide that. And then any assistance you may require when it comes to disputes, debt recoveries, and more. We also have, ensure our clients have access to unlimited domestic trademark registration. So you'll be able to speak to a lawyer about that. And given that we're on a health and safety webinar, I would like to talk to you about our health and safety at work add-on service. And what we do is we provide our clients with a comprehensive risk management and compliance framework, just to allow them to comply with all their ongoing legal obligations, most of which we've shared with you today. But also we help them and assist them when carrying out the necessary risk assessments. And also sometimes our clients come to us just to ask us of what practical steps, based on our experience, other people are doing to manage a risk or hazard in the workplace. So it's quite useful, very, very useful. And also as a LegalVision member, you wouldn't have to worry about the cost of lawyers ever again, and the all dreadful hourly rates. So think of it as having your own in-house counsel where you have access to a team of specialist lawyers in all different practice areas, and will be able to care for all your business as usual legal work whilst you focus on running your business. And of course, if you're an in-house counsel, in-house lawyer, then our membership is quite cost-effective solution if you have outstanding additional legal work. So I'm not going to talk too much about this. If you want to learn more about our membership, how we can help you, please make good use of that free consultation we talked about earlier on, and the survey will appear at the end of this webinar. Do provide us with your details. So without further delay, we will answer your questions. And yes, we do have a couple of questions, and I will pass the first one to Saeidul, please.
Thank you, Comfort. So I can see the first question's just popped through in the chat, and the question is there a minimum or maximum temperature in the workplace? So that is a great question that's been asked there. So generally speaking, employees must simply keep the temperature at a comfortable level and provide clean and fresh air to staff. So there's currently no minimum or maximum temperatures in the workplace, but guidance from the HSE suggests that we should have a minimum temperature of 16 degrees or 13 degrees if the individuals are doing physical manual labor type of work. So there is no such guidance given for maximum temperature. So as I say, just to recap on that, there's no sort of minimum or maximum temperature, but guidance suggests a minimum of 16 or 13 degrees if you do manual labor. I can see there's a second question pop through as well. I'll pass that on to yourself, Comfort.
Thank you very much, Saeidul. So the second question we have is, we rent an office space and we assume that the building management are the ones responsible for the health and safety of the whole building. Is this correct? So that's actually a very good question, and it's a question we do have a lot given in the current business world. A lot of companies do share office buildings, although they have their own actual space for their workers. So generally, the question is always, where really does health and safety responsibility lie? Is it with the facilities management? And to answer your question, the duty to comply with health and safety regulations usually, fall to a landlord, a building owner, or perhaps in this case, a managing agent. So, they do have obligations as well when it comes to health and safety. And if you wanted to find out more about this, I would say, it's best to speak to them directly, or perhaps a leasing document may touch on this further. But that said, you as an employer also have the responsibility for health and safety and the welfare of all your staff and everyone generally affected by the business you carry out. So you can't just ignore your obligations and just expect the building management to do all the work. You must take your own obligations quite seriously and very seriously, and also complete the necessary risk assessments for the premises and the office you occupy. And generally, what we advise is that we encourage employers and companies that are, in shared working environment or building space to speak to and, work in collaboration with the safety managers on site and the landlords and property managers, because generally, by having sight of their own health and safety or risk assessment report, it will help you as well to consider and extend that to your office. And also, if you're thinking about things like fire evacuation plan that we spoke about earlier on, you will have to know where are other businesses, where is their meeting point outside of the building, and just make sure that yours align with that, of course, if the route is safe. So you do have a responsibility as well as the building management as a whole. And I'm going to pass the next question to Saeidul on DSE assessment, given he covered this.
Thank you, Comfort. So yeah, I could see someone asked a question of when do we have to consider a DSE assessment for staff? So it's another good question. Let's pop through there. And just to recap, DSE simply means display screen equipment. So effectively, when it comes to this, you have to assess the risk to any individual that regularly uses DSE equipment, such as a computer or laptop, as a significant part of their normal work. And that means habitually using it. So that means we're looking at those that use it typically for continuous periods of an hour or more. And we have to think about some of the risks that I identified before, such as pains and aches to the neck or back, or just general discomfort or injury from overuse or improper use of display screen equipment. Some issues may also occur due simply to poor lighting as well. So what you have to really consider is identify what type of equipment you have, which users and operators are covered by that. You have to look at assessing all the sort of workstations, ensure that you meet the minimum requirements for them. So, for example, if you've got desk chairs, make sure that staff know how to correctly set them to correct height. If they've got armrests, make sure they're at a comfortable level as well, so we can mitigate any risk of harm occurring from improper use of that type of equipment as well. And simply when it comes to screens or monitors, to ensure that they are the correct distance away from them as well. We're talking about at least an arm's length away from their eyes as well, to avoid any sort of strain as well. Talk about eyes as well. On request, as an employee, you should be looking to provide eye and eyesight tests as well, and special corrective spectacles if they become necessary. And finally, you should also look to provide training information to staff as well, if that does become necessary as well. I'll pass you now back to my colleague Comfort as well, just go through some of the final points.
Thank you very much, Saeidul. So we have another question, which is to do with HR software. So the question is, does having HR software and recording it online okay, or do I need a physical copy of an incident book, for example? So generally, to answer that, which is a very good question, because a lot of the time now companies have everything virtual, so everything is online, which is good. So if you have HR software, and then that's where you store HR-related documents, procedures, and in this case, an accident book, then it is okay, provided that your health and safety manager will have access to that accident book, and also people carrying out risk assessment for your premises will also have access to the accident or incident book, because generally if you're carrying out risk assessments, you want to see what are the current incidents people have reported, and it's always a good place to check the accident book or perhaps employees current sickness records, just to see any recurring themes. So yes, you can store things virtually online, but just make sure that people that are responsible for the health and safety in your premises do have access to these documents, or if someone requested, you can provide it to them. And also sometimes people have HR softwares, which of course they're paying monthly for, so there's a subscription mode. Just make sure that when your subscription expires, you can download the required documents and save it on a folder if that becomes necessary, because you don't want to lose access to everything and not be able to recover it. So yeah, that was a good question. And also we've been asked whether the PowerPoint can be emailed following the webinar. Yes, please do email us if you need anything else, and we can provide that to you. Thank you very much. So just looking at the time, I believe that's all we have time for today, unfortunately. And as I said, after the webinar ends, a survey is going to pop up, and we would really, really appreciate it if you could please complete the 30-second survey for us. And if you wanted to take advantage of that complimentary legal consultation with one of our lawyers, do include your contact details to receive this. And of course, you can also ask us questions as to how we can help you with health and safety and other legal needs in relation to your workplace. So from Saeidul and myself and the rest of the LegalVision team, thank you so much for joining us today. Goodbye.